Deepest running back room since the white ball Gordon era? Let's talk about it.
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, Badger fans? Welcome to Locked On Badgers, your team every single day. Thank you so much for tuning in, for being part of this journey, for being part of this community. This is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And for all the everydayers that are here every single day, thank you so much for tuning in. Today's episode is brought to you by our boys over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. So I was doing kind of a thought experiment, and it was really kind of inspired by the running back depth chart and just how deep it is. And I was starting to think, when was the last time you had this many guys in the running back room that you felt confident could also play this year in some way, shape, or form? This isn't like I feel confident that that this is not a litmus test that I feel confident in every one of these players being a star this year. But I feel confident in 6 of these guys playing this year if they had to. If these guys had to step into a role, I'd be like, okay, I think let's roll with it. And there's only 7 scholarship running backs. So I started thinking about it. What percentage of players on this roster do we feel comfortable playing right now? And how does that look like when you break it out unit by unit? And then historically, for just like, especially the running back position, what does that look like? And it got to me thinking this might be the deepest running back room we've had in a decade, right? You go back to those ball white Gordon rooms that also had maybe Derek Watt in there. Then you start talking 4 or 5 deep. You know, they had Lewis in there in that mix. But there's 7 scholarship running backs in this roster. And I feel pretty good that 6 of them could play this year and play at a level that's good enough that you're okay with them being on the field. Right? That's 85% of the running back depth chart that you're okay with. So that's Chez, Tawee, Acker, Dupree, and Jones. And people will say, well, you can't count on the freshmen. I'm telling you, the coaches are. Like, everyone you talk to, it's unprompted. Fickle said it. We got to get those guys reps. I mean, he's saying it specifically. And Acker is going to play. They're using him in goal lines, or not goal lines, red zone situations. Power back. He's gotten better and better. Mellusi's look good. He could absolutely step in there and play if you had to have him play. And then you step the top 2 in Chez and Tawee. That's 6 out of 7 at that spot that I think could play this year. Again, 85% of that depth chart you feel pretty good about. That's depth and quality and numbers. Like, it's not hyperbole, man. That room is really deep. And it's not as good when I say deepest running back room since some of those early 2010-ish type teams. It's not as good as those rooms. Make no mistake, there's not, unless Jones or Dupree become mega stars. There's, those rooms we're comparing them to had Melvin Gordon, they had Monty Ball, they had James White, right? Those were special rooms. John Clay was a special player. For that 1 year, he had 1,500 yards, Big Ten Offensive Player of the Year. I'm not saying this room is better, but I think this room is deeper. It's as deep as we've had it that I can remember. It's a real credit to the team. It's a real credit to the coaching staff, the recruiting staff. You look at how this room was built. It's a combination of guys from the Christ era, and it's a combination of recruits they've won, plus a couple transfers in Chez and Tawee. It's really good. It's really deep. And the more I thought about it, the more I'm like, we got to talk about this, because this is about as deep as I can remember at that spot. And then I was like, well, let's go position by position. Let's do this. Let's see what percentage of players at each position do we think could play a meaningful role this year and the performance not suffer. Again, I have it at 85% for the running backs. 6 out of 7 scholarship players, I think, could play this year and be fine. And by the way, Grover Bartolotti, a walk-on, like, that's a really good walk-on. So that room is loaded to the gills. Yeah, really, really good. Let's look at inside linebacker. I have 83% here. 83% of these guys, 5 out of 6, I think could play a meaningful role this year. That's Thomas, Chaney, Allegro, Jancy, Curtis. Only Landon Gauthier, true freshman. And I should go back and say Gideon Atuka is the only running back I didn't include we could really see him this year, and we wouldn't see any type of drop-off. That's no knock to Gideon Atuka. The dude's a true freshman. That's no knock to Landon Gauthier. Dude's a true freshman. But again, that linebacker room, the inside linebacker room, you're looking at tons of quality depth, right? Thomas, Chaney, Allegro, Jancy, and Tackett Curtis. Any one of those 5 guys, that's 5 out of 6 at that spot. any one of those 5 guys, I think, could step up and play, and you're not going to see a huge drop. Now, Tackett's probably maybe on the outside looking in, but I think he's going to get better and better as the season wears on, as he gets his feet underneath him. Those 2 spots, man, running back and inside linebacker, over 80% of the players at those scholarship spots, I think, could play this year and play at a level that you're not going to see a dramatic drop off. Tons of depth there. Really, really good job by the staff. Highlight some of the depth that they built on this roster. Receiver, I have it at 67%. So I have, as the guys who could play, Bryson, Pauling, Anthony, Henry, CJ Williams, Brooks, Tretch, and Kion Berry-Johnson. I think those 7 could step in and you'd be okay. Some of those people might push back on Kion Berry-Johnson. I've seen him in practice a little bit with the 2 deep, that he could play rotationally in spots. I really do think they could use him in certain situations, get him in space, using him across the middle, using him out of the slot if they had to. I think he'd be okay. I think Henry would be okay, right? That's 7 guys. I have 4, Hankon Anderson, Quincy Burrows, just because he hasn't really been able to get healthy, Joseph Griffin, and Nate White, who just moved over there. So again, that's 7 out of 11 spots there that I think you could look at and say, I think that those players could step in and play, and the team wouldn't be dramatically worse off. That's 67% there. Another spot where they've done a really good job of building depth. Receivers kind of like running back into that. There's maybe not as much star power there, but I think the depth has gotten built up to a point where it's going to withstand the rigors of the season. And that's what Big Ten football is. That's what college football is. You have to have depth. You have to be able to withstand attrition. You have to be able to take hits. You have to dig into your 2 deep and your 3 deep. All 3 of these spots, running back, inside linebacker, and receiver, I think there's enough depth there to withstand a couple injuries and to make it through the season. Now, no matter what, you're going to be worse if you lose your best players out of those spots. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying the depth in those spots is pretty good. All right, we're going to take a quick break there. Come back. We're going to talk about cornerback, outside linebacker, defensive line. How do we feel about the depth in those spots? What percentage of players do we feel good about playing out of those roles? That's coming up next on Locked On Badgers. But first, a quick break for our boys of the show over at Game Time. Listen, Game Time is it. You want tickets? Go to Game Time. You want to entertain the misses? Go to Game Time. You want to treat your boys to a show, a concert, a theater, man, go to Game Time. Hook them up. Make them think that you're a big spender. You went all out when low key on the down low, back on the side. You got a great deal. You didn't spend a ton of money. You earned a ton of brownie points, the best tickets, the biggest inventory, the best selection of prices. Any event you want, it's all on Game Time. Like, save money, make it easier. Pick from the best inventory that's available, and last minute deals, flash deals. So as the event gets closer, you actually save more money, which means you don't have to plan ahead. And if you're a non-planner like me, that's kind of a great perk. Just go with the flow. My wife hates it. She's such a planner, and I'm like, I am chaotic madness at the end of it. So she hates it that I'm not a planner, but Game Time loves it that I'm not a big planner, because you don't have to be a big planner with Game Time. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Okay, let's keep going here. Let's talk some more positions. So cornerback, how many cornerbacks do we feel could step in? And this is kind of a numbers exercise. It's kind of a thoughts exercise. This is also just an exercise of who do you feel confident in? Let me know in the chat, in the comments. Like, who do you feel confident from these different spots could step in and the team wouldn't suffer a big loss? Like, there wouldn't be a dramatic drop in play. You wouldn't see other teams targeting these players, right? If you lose your starters, it's going to be worse. That's how it works. But how many of these players do you feel okay stepping in and playing a role? At cornerback, these are the guys I'm okay with this year stepping in and playing a role, being physical, being able to compete. Rico, Nizier, DeCluna, Lofi, Delancey, Xavier Lucas, and I kind of think Amari Snowden. He's on the fringe. You could go either way, I think, with Amari Snowden, depending on who you talk to, maybe what role you envision, what you've seen of him. I think he could go out there and compete against bigger physical receivers and give you something. There were some issues in practice. He got ran by a couple times, but the skill set I think is interesting. So I have 7, and the guys I wouldn't be fully sold on this year: Jace Arnold, Justin Taylor, Jay Harper, and Emilio Agard. All younger players for the most part. That's no knock whatsoever. Emilio's dealt with some injury stuff. I think Taylor and Harper are just a little further behind. Haven't seen a ton of Jace Arnold, really fast player. That gives you 63% of that position that you feel pretty good about coming in and playing. You feel at least okay about coming in and playing. Again, if you want to quibble, maybe you want to wait and see with Xavier Lucas. I'm telling you, if you ask him to come in and just play tight coverage on a guy, he's going to give you competitive reps there for the most part. You could quibble on Amari Snowden. Curious where people go on that. But yeah, that's who I think in the cornerback room could come in and play right away. Outside linebacker. So outside linebacker is interesting because I think just about everybody could. But it's not a very deep spot, right? So I think the quality of depth at outside linebacker is really high, but the quantity of depth at outside linebacker is not as high. Whereas cornerback, the quantity of depth is high, and I think the quality of depth is high. So outside linebacker, I have it at 75% of that group that I feel can come in and play and give you good minutes. So that's Pius, Witt, Lowry, Peterson, Lafayette, and Heiberger. Now, they got to be healthy, right? Heiberger's hurt right now. Witt's hurt right now. The two guys I'm kind of not sure on, it's Sebastian Cheeks, who was just moved outside linebacker, and he's looked pretty good in moments. He's gotten a couple call outs, so maybe you'd feel fine with him playing there if you needed him. And then Ernest Willer Jr., the defense lineman, they shifted out outside linebacker. I like the upside. He was a big time get. I still kind of, when I squint and look at him, I feel like feels like a defensive lineman. And listen, the coaches know him better than I do. Absolutely, that goes without saying. But there's not a lot of extra depth at outside linebacker. You feel good about just about everybody in the room. Like Pius, absolutely. Lowry, absolutely. Peterson, absolutely. Aaron Witt, if he's healthy, yeah, absolutely. There's 4. Lafayette, yeah, absolutely. Heiberger, if he's healthy, I think so. Cheeks and Willer, you can go either way. But again, that's a group that doesn't have a bunch of numbers, but it does have a high quality of depth. I have that group at 75% that you feel good with coming in. Defensive line, I have at 77%. Really, I think you feel okay if Hills is playing, Elijah Hills, McDonald, Thompson Jr., Barton, Lane, Curtis Neal, and I think Dilon Johnson. That gives you 7. I think, are any of those players, if any of those players are out there in meaningful reps, are you exceedingly worried, Badger fans? Elijah Hills, Cade McDonald, James Thompson Jr., Ben Barton, Curtis Lane, Curtis Neal, Brandon Lane, and Dilon Johnson. That's 77% of that room that you feel okay about getting snaps. This is starting to hit on a theme as I was going through this. I feel like the quality of depth is really getting much stronger on this roster. Like the talent on the periphery, the talent on the edges, and the talent in the 2 deep, I think is getting stronger. I think it's getting better. And now it's just numbers. Right now, it's the numbers that need to get up in certain spots. Defensive line to me is one of those spots. The 2 guys that I said, I'm not sure this year. It's Hank Weber, true freshman. Again, absolutely no issues there. Freshmen aren't supposed to come in and compete right away on the defensive line, the offensive line. Heck, they're not supposed to come in and compete anywhere right away, really. So that's no knock, no trepidation. He's got time. And then it's Jamel Howard. I don't know. Honestly, I don't think he flashed a ton in the week I was able to watch him, talking to some other people. I don't think he's flashed a ton. I think he's a little further down. So I have those 2 that are kind of in the outside. Again, it's a bit of a numbers game, so I think the depth here is pretty good, but the quantity could get a little bigger. If you look at numbers for scholarships, and this is a bit of a side this exercise we're doing, but there's 9. Wisconsin has 9 scholarship defensive linemen right now. Oregon has 12. Penn State has 11. Bama has 15. Wisconsin has 9. And that's with, I took Ernest Willer off that. Maybe he ends up moving back to defensive line. And then there's a couple guys coming in this class, right? Telemock, Torrin Petaway. So Xavier Upaknu. So there's guys, reinforcements coming, but they have to rebuild that room in terms of numbers. Because when you compare Wisconsin from a scholarship number standpoint to other schools, and it's a little tricky. It's not apples to apples, right? Because every school has different schemes. Every school has different numbers they want on the defensive line. You know, maybe a school's running a 4-3, or 3-4, or 3-3-5, or they're going to run more of a 2-4-5, right? I get that. That being said, I think you need more than 9 scholarship defensive linemen. I just think you need 10, 11, 12, because you need those bodies. Not everybody's going to hit. Some players are going to get hurt. Some are going to rotate out. Some are going to transfer. I think that's an area where Wisconsin needs to continue getting 2 to 3 every single cycle. And then you're building it up to 12 to 15, right? Then you're building up those numbers. So they've started doing it. They did it a little bit last cycle. They're doing it this cycle. It needs to continue happening. But that's still an area where the numbers, I would say, aren't necessarily in Wisconsin's favor. But once again, you feel good about the quality of depth there, right? When you say, I think 70, and to me, it's 77% of those guys can play. The only 2 guys, and correct me if I'm wrong, you tell me, is anyone not confident if Elijah needs a couple reps, if Brandon Lane needs a couple reps, I think they can all play a little bit. All right, let's go to tight end next. This one's a 50%er for me. So there's 6 scholarship tight ends. I think you feel okay this year if you see Riley Nowakowski for sure, Tucker Ashcraft for sure, and then Jackson McGowan. Sorry, I have to get that right. I've mispronounced it originally the wrong time. Jackson McGowan. Ugh. Do you feel good with Jackson on the field? I swear to goodness, I am not doing that on purpose. It's like a mental block with that name for me, and I'm going to fix it. Obviously, Nowakowski's going to play. Ashraf's going to play. They're going to use those guys on the edges. They're going to use those guys in run blocking. They're going to use them as outlets as well, right? Those are players that, Tucker Ashcraft may finish the season with 8 catches. Riley Nowakowski might get 4 or 5, something like that. But they could be, out of those 10 catches the two of them combined for, it could be for like 2 or 3 first downs, right? So there'll be outlet receivers, there'll be blockers, there'll be physical point of attack guys, players that they'll run receiver screens behind, those type of things. Those two are going to play, and they're going to be solid in their roles. Depending on who you talk to, is Jackson going to play a role this year? I think he'll work his way into it. We saw some flashes in practice towards the end, catching a couple touchdowns with the 2 deep, with the twos. But I think there's some flashes there where you can say, okay, maybe he'll play. The guys I don't think you'd be comfortable seeing a ton from this year, JT Seagreaves, former Chris player, hasn't really flashed. And then the 2 freshmen, right? Rob Booker, Grant Steck. I thought Steck might be able to come in, and just because he's physically developed, he's a really big kid, good hands, 4-star prospect. I thought he might come in and push a little bit more, but it looks like he's probably still a year out. And again, that's realistic. That is the normal timeline for these guys. So no concerns there. I have that number at about 50% with the 3 guys, and I'm going to include Jackson in that. But let me know if you think he's going to play a role this year or not. We're going to take a quick break for our friends of the show. We're going to come back and talk offensive line. We're going to talk safety. We're going to talk a few other spots, plus a couple of walk-ons I think you should keep an eye on. That's coming up next on Locked On Badgers. But first, a quick break for our friends of the show. Also, a quick second that they say thank you. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of the community. Really, really do appreciate y'all. It's absolutely incredible to be building this with you, building it together. So thank you so much for that. All right, let's talk safety. Let's go offensive line. Let's go offensive line, because this is the one where we've talked a lot about the depth, right? How good do we feel about this depth chart? How worried are we? I have it at 53%. Like, again, this is just me. This is only my opinion. Let me know where you think I'm wrong on this. These are the guys I think you feel comfortable with in some role this year. Kerry Kadonko is the backup center. Renfro, Huber, Nelson, Molman, Brunner, Haywood. I think you put Haywood in this list at this point. Originally, you're not really excited to see a true freshman, but he's got so many reps with the ones. He's mostly held his own. And then JP Benchwell. So that gives me 8. The players that you're a little worried about or aren't going to see a role, right? It's Barrett Nelson. Leighton Nelson obviously got hurt. James Duran, Colin Cubberly, Derek Jensen, Ryan Corey, and Emerson Mandell. Couldn't Mandell play because they need him? Yeah, he could, but I don't think you necessarily want it, right? Just because he came from a high school that didn't really throw the ball, more of an option team. I think you want him to take a year. So I think there's this is kind of the opposite of the outside linebacker room, right? It's kind of the opposite of maybe the defensive line room as well. Here you have quality of numbers, or quantity in numbers, but at least for this year, I don't think you have great quality of depth. And this is one of those areas where this could really come back to bite them this year. And it's not because they didn't try to address it, right? They brought Joey Okla in. They obviously brought Leighton Nelson in, both transfer portal guys. They brought 5 offensive linemen last class, 5 offensive linemen this class. They were able to make sure Nelson came back. Like, they definitely attacked this room, but it's still light. It's still light with experience. The young talent is a year or 2 away from really becoming the best versions of themselves. So again, I think there's quality in here. I think there's quantity here, but I think the quality for this year is a little lacking. I have that at 53%. Let me know if you feel more comfortable than I do in guys like Nelson, Duran, Cubberly, Jensen, Corey, Mandell having to play a big role this year, because that would change the equation. Let's go safeties. Safeties, I have 4 out of 6 guys, right? So I have about 65% here. I think you're comfortable with Kamoe Latu, certainly Hunter Wohler, certainly Preston Zachman, certainly Austin Brown. Braden Moore, I have as not quite yet, and Raphael Dunn, I have as not quite yet. Maybe you could convince me on Braden Moore, and then that number gets into the 80 percentile, because then 5 out of 6 can play. But I don't think they're going to necessarily need more safeties. And low key, Owen Arnett, who is a preferred walk-on safety, number 18, he's really good. Like especially for walk-on, but he's a good player regardless. Drop the walk-on nomenclature. He's just a good, solid football player in the back end. So that gives you 5 safeties there. I have a feeling that you would see Owen Arnett before Braden Moore, probably. And Raphael Dunn is just a big ball of clay. It's not going to be this year for him, but there's a ton of upside, length, and athleticism with that guy. So file that one away. But in the future, that's definitely a player that you could look out for. I wanted to hit on a couple preferred walk-ons that I think are interesting, guys that add to the depth in spots. And then we might not get those anymore, right? The preferred walk-ons, now that they're bumping it up to 120 scholarship, they're adding 20 scholarships. It might realistically be kind of the end of the walk-on era, but there's some good ones on this roster. We highlighted Garrison Soliday the other day, inside linebacker out of Minnesota. He's a redshirt junior. He had a really good practice in the night scrimmage, last one in Platteville. Really, really good practice. So I'm interested to see. I think he gives you some depth, right? Langdon Nordgaard, I thought, has had a really good kind of practice, kind of fall camp from what I've seen as a true freshman walk-on. There's a receiver there to foul kind of in the back of your head and just keep your eyes on. Owen Arnett, I mentioned, Grover Bortolotti. So a couple preferred walk-ons that I would just file away in the back of the brain. Definitely good depth pieces, increases quality competition, increases the depth. And honestly, they bring heart. They're culture guys, and that stuff really friggin' matters. So, yeah, that's the show. I thought it was interesting. Let me know if you think there's players that I don't think could maybe step in seamlessly this year that you think could, or vice versa. My rough numbers, again, I think about 83%, 85% of the running backs could play, 83% of the inside linebackers, 67% of the receivers. Quincy Burrows, if he was healthy, would flip up into that could play this year role. Now would change the equation. Let's see. Cornerbacks at 63%, outside linebackers 75%, but not a lot of bodies. Defensive line 77%, but again, not a lot of bodies. Safety, I have about 65%, tight end 50%, and offensive line 53%. And it goes back to that depth question on the offensive line. Thank you so much for tuning in. Some really fun interviews coming up this week. So make sure to check that out. When you're done here, go check out Locked On College Football, 24/7 stream of the best college football news and notes going on in the college football world. You're not going to want to miss it. That's on the Locked On Podcast Network.